Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Your name is Boahini, right? The surname?
Yeah, Smith Boyne.
Okay, Smith. Thank you. Smith works with the Institute of Energy Security. You are arguing for the fact that even if any levy is touched, not the BOST margin.
Yeah.
Why not?
Thank you and good morning to your listeners again. So yes, we understand the situation in terms of the petroleum price and the hikes and the tension and all of that is happening currently. And we understand that there is a clear distinction between what is happening in the Middle East and its correspondent or its effect to what is happening in the country. We've gone past that stage, knowing that government wants to institute some intervention. And some of those intervention is that government will look at some of the taxes and levies that it can touch to be able to bring some relief to consumers. And IES has mentioned earlier that one, the government can touch the price stabilization and recovery levy, as there's been precedent for it, and its purpose is mainly in times like this. In 2021, it was suspended after the COVID. In 2024, it was equally suspended when fuel reached 23 cities and 17 cities respectively, the diesel and then gasoline. And fast forward, we can also look at the 1 city levy. As it stands now, government can either cut it by half or remove it for this window. But we must also take into cognizance the fact that all this is just to serve for this window, after which government has indicated that they're going to review its application and its implication in the market. But one margin that IES has cautioned against, knowing how fragile our petroleum industry is now, is the BOST margin. Why are we saying that? When you look at petroleum consumption as it is now, it is increasing astronomically. The last 4 years, it has almost more than doubled. In 2023, our petroleum consumption was around 1.5 million barrels. In 2026, or 56, it's around 5.6 million barrels. That is more than double. But the accompanying infrastructure that must ensure that we are able to accommodate this growth is not there. And BOST is the one responsible for that. So if you look at BOST, obviously is responsible for operation, transportation and storage of fuel. And there have been calls that this undertaking must be implemented effectively. And so taking off the margin now will further cripple the sector one and cripple BOST operation. Why am I saying this? If you look at the Eastern Corridor as it stands now, in terms of BOST transportation, which is the Tema and its environment, there is an inverse relationship between the Eastern Corridor and Western Corridor in terms of discharge facility and storage facility. The Eastern Corridor, you realize that upon the reform committee's work on the downstream petroleum sector instituted by the Energy Ministry last year, August, they recommended that the government of BOST must establish or build a storage facility in the Western Corridor because there is a challenge with the storage of the product. They have discharge capacity, all right, but storage is the problem. And if you come to the Eastern Corridor, they have storage capacity, but discharge is also a problem. If you go to the northern corridor, there must be an expansion of the Boipe and Boigatanga pipeline, which is not currently happening. That BOST is planning to undertake. Critical sector. The Burkinabes has also informed government or the sector that they would like to source petrol from Ghana, and that will mean that BOST must extend. You must look at the cheapest way you can be able to source this product, which is through pipelines, right? So BOST must probably extend the Boigatanga pipeline, pipeline, to the borders of Burkina Faso. BOST is also looking at procuring barges to transport fuel on the Volta Lake to the north, and also to extend its pipeline from 6 to 12 inches as it is. And so all this is aimed at accommodating the increase in consumption that we have witnessed, for example, that is currently unveiling before our eyes. And also, if, for example, if BOST is able to source product for Kenya, they can tax that transport to be able to generate some revenue for the company and government by extension. So taxing the BOST margin at this critical juncture may not augur well for the industry as it is. So that has been the position of our years. Rather, what government can do is, as we have indicated earlier, look at either cutting by half the 1 cedi levy or suspending it entirely for this window, and the price stabilization recovery levy. Government can look at that. Again, thermal oil refinery, after their first performance test, have a residual fuel oil as part of its petroleum product. And it has been a directive from the ministry that that product should be sourced to the thermal plants who are dual powered, right? So if we are procuring it locally, it means that we will cut that. We will be able, if you're procuring locally to against importing it, it means the price will be down by half. So even if you have the 1 cedi levy, the local procurement of this residual fuel that this thermal plants use will be able to cover for a bit or a fraction of the losses that government is going to make by cutting this fuel by half. Government can also look at cross pricing that is undertaken by our peer countries, the likes of Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. They adopt to some extent cross pricing, even though it may not be ideal for the long term, but for this pricing window, it is something government can look at. So the cross pricing, you are looking at between the petrol and diesel, which one can you subsidize them more? And so if you do that, if you look, okay, mostly the standard practice is that it is petrol because petrol is more household. So if you subsidize that for the short term, you will be able to bring a significant cushion to consumers. But look, actually, BOST margin at a point where there is not that there hasn't been that demonstrated will to, in terms of infrastructure development, to accommodate the volume in petroleum consumption that we are experiencing now. Touching the margin now will be shooting ourselves in the foot and trying to really cripple the industry. So that has been the position of our years.
Very interesting. So for you, for the sake of those developments that are important to the movement of fuel across the country, the BOST margin should not be touched.
Should not be touched. Should not be touched.
But there are those who also suggest that it is in its name, that what we intended BOST to do was to hold strategic stocks so that in the case of a crisis such as this, they release those strategic stocks that would then affect the price of fuel on the market. Do they hold those strategic stocks that we can tend to say, BOST is performing?
Good. I mean, brilliant question. I mean, we are in this country. We've obviously heard that, BOST has not been effective over the period. BOST has not been effective. But if indeed they have not been effective as we are saying, and they are using this small margin as it is to be able to operate, what will happen if that margin is taken off them? It means that, obviously they are going to collapse. We've been talking about strategic reserves over the period. That how are we able to store products enough to say, okay, we have enough product to last us about 2, 3, 4 months. And that is all due to the infrastructure. In terms of availability of the product, it is not a problem. But the infrastructure mainly is a problem, as I did indicated. In fact, we have, since this tension of this petroleum dynamic started, we had about 3-4 weeks of petroleum reserves. But it could have been better. And how are we going to accommodate that? How are we going to reconcile removing the BOST margin, even if it is for a short term, removing the margin, and also expecting that we are able to accrue more reserves? How are you able to reconcile the two? Even after this now, you are complaining that the company is not quote unquote effective, right? So how are you going to reconcile the two? Removing the margin for aim towards strategic reserve, and then saying that boss must operate effectively. So touching the margin is a non-starter. That one is guaranteed. There are a number of options, as I've indicated, that
so,
government can look at.
I want you to go through those options again. So one of them you called cross pricing.
Yeah.
And you're talking about subsidies, something that we had decided a few years back that we're not going to do. You're proposing that it's one of the things that should be on the table?
Yes, one thing we must not lose sight of is that what we are talking about is just for this pricing window. It's for this pricing window. Indeed, the minister had indicated that after the April 16 pricing window ends, they are going to reconvene again and look at the dynamics about what the way forward should be. So the cross pricing is not, obviously, it is not, it is a political tool more than an economic tool, that is for sure. But if that will bring some relief to consumers now for the 3 weeks or 4 weeks period to be able to contain the situation, you must look at the pros and cons and see which of the products can you subsidize the more. So, obviously, it has been petrol because petrol is household. So if that is just going to be for this window, then it is an option we can consider. If we are saying that, okay, we are not going to see a significant cushion looking at when we want to look at the price stabilization and recovery levy, even though I beg to differ. But if the conversation is curved around that, then these options are available. You can either remove the 1 cedi levy, cut it by half, look at cross pricing, look at the price stabilization recovery levy, or other options that government may deem fit. But IS position has been, looking at how fragile the petroleum industry has been in terms of increase in consumption, it will be inappropriate to touch the BOST margin.
Well, which, if you were, because I was the two ministries have a task that has been given to them. They still have to look through the margins and the levies. So let's assume we leave the BOST margin. Which other levies or taxes do you think we can target?
The BOST margin, obviously, is out. The 1 cedi levy, I've said we can touch, is also a component of taxes and levy for the final petroleum pricing, as it is the export price. We can look at the price stabilization recovery levy, which is purposely meant for situations like this. As I've mentioned, the president certain scenarios over the last couple of years. So these are some of the taxes government can touch.
I see. Aside that, and aside the cross pricing, we're talking about some procurement issues that can be dealt with.
Yes, I earlier indicated that yes, Tor after its first performances, fantastic job by the current management as it is. They are looking at going into full production now, and they have been able to refine products, and part of that product is residual for RFO, which some of these thermal plants obviously use to generate power for us. So if you are able to procure this locally, or if you are procuring this locally, then it means that it is offsetting a fraction of the deficit that government will incur in procuring this from outside the country. It is obvious that both of us are talking now. I agree on that. If you are buying something outside the country and buying it within, the dynamics are not the same in terms of pricing. And so that is why IS has maintained over the period that more focus should be given to thermal oil refinery. If they are able to operate, more focus in terms of finances, in terms of resources. If they are able to operate at full capacity efficiently, some of these problems will not be this daring. It will not be this daring, because no matter how you look at it, Ghana is a net importer of fuel, about 60% of that. And our upstream exploration is declining over the period. And so we must diversify, the way we look at the industry in resource and store to function and to its maximum capacity. So if the fear is that when we take off the 1 cedi levy, how are we going to procure fuel? I have cited this scenario, which will mean that even though we may not offset the entire deficit, because that will be around, if I'm not wrong, about 500 million Ghana cedis deficit, if, say, we want to halve the 1 cedi levy or take it off. But this RFO from TOR to the thermal plan can offset a fraction of it. So these are some of these things that we talk about. It is not just for talking sake. For example, ensuring that TOR is operating properly is to be able to protect the industry in situations like this.
Smith, thank you very much for speaking to us.
You're most welcome. Most welcome. Thank you.
Smith Boahini, Senior Research and Policy Analyst, Institute of Energy Security. And Nancy, this is Al Jazeera reporting 28 minutes ago. That's 15 minutes past 8 when they post this. Germany to cut tax on fuel for 2 months. It says Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Germany would cut petrol and diesel taxes for 2 months to provide relief to households and businesses hit by the energy shock of the war. Will reduce the fuel tax on diesel and gasoline by approximately 17 euros